Hello, it's Jo from Minerva. I'm here today to do a sew along for people who are learning to sew, and it is Simplicity 8894, and it's a really small project to get going on. Really nice as a gift for somebody. It's a baby romper. It's quite unisex, although the image here is quite a little girl version. There are other versions on here with cuff legs and a pocket front. I'm going to make view D to show you how to put the pocket on the front. The pattern's made for stretch knits, so I'm going to use this ochre colour, which is called super light sweatshirt fabric, and it's fleece backed, and it's really nice weight for children's clothes. As you can see, it is not really bulky. It's got a really nice cozy fleece back on and a smooth finish on the sweatshirt side. This one's ochre. It comes in lots of other different colours, but then you can use this pattern quite seasonally, so you can make this one in the summer and then this one for wearing in the winter with long sleeves. There are some other things that will be on the product list. There's some buttons for here and here on the dungarees, and thread and some other products that I might use along the way. This is a Simplicity pattern which is marketed for a learn to sew pattern, so there's lots of pictures, not too many instructions, and it's easy to follow if you're new to sewing. Let's get cutting. There's a few things to note when you're cutting out stretch fabrics. This fabric's got quite a bit of stretch in it, so in the width it's got a good stretch, and the same in the length, but not quite so much. So you want to make sure when you fold your fabric in half, you're keeping the grain line straight, otherwise you'll get a twisted front on your baby suit, and you need to have the greatest amount of stretch going across the body. So you need the greatest stretch going in this direction, not the length. When you cut your fabric, you might find it's a little bit curly on the edge. That's not a sign of quality. That's just because you're cutting through the content that makes it stretchy. So if you put pins at diagonals, that helps to keep that curl just flat while you're cutting. When I'm making children's wear, I like to not cut out the pattern pieces. I could trace them off onto Swedish paper, but I like to use a dressmaker's carbon paper technique, because if I like this pattern, then very soon I might find that the child will grow out of it. So I'm going to trace off a small, but I've left intact all the rest of the paper pattern piece that's large. So I've put the waxy side down on the fabric, and then I'm going to keep moving it around and getting a new cutting line for a small. It's pinned along the fold edge, so the fold edge stays put, and I can keep moving around the carbon paper, but it's a lot faster than tracing off a pattern and then knowing that maybe, especially for a toddler pattern, that in 6 months' time I'll need to trace off another size. So I'll show you what it looks like. It's not a very bold mark. But on the fabric, I've got a white chalk line now moving around the fabric, which means that I can cut that out. The carbon paper is also good for transferring markings, so I can definitely put my notches on here and here, here, and I've also got a buttonhole mark. So I'm just going to put my carbon paper under there so that I can transfer my markings straight onto the fabric. So now I've got my buttonhole mark as well. It's particularly useful on this pattern because on the front piece I need to mark a place for a pocket, so I've used the carbon paper here to mark where my pocket piece goes. It's quite a good technique. It's one of those little things, you invest in it and you think, oh, I can do without that, but actually I use it for marking darts, I use it for tracing off patterns, I use it for doing any sort of intricate markings that would be tricky if I had to keep flapping the paper back. This is the serrated blunt tool that you use. It sort of corrugates the paper but doesn't rip it, and it doesn't damage your fabric. There are a few simple pieces. There's a front with the pocket on the back, a back facing, and a front facing, and a pocket piece to go on the front, and also some leg cuffs, and then you're ready to sew. I'm going to be following the sew along as if you were following the pattern at home, so that you know you can check in with any stage that you're stuck on. So number one is to add the pocket to the view that we are doing today. If you're not doing the pocket, you can skip me on a little bit, but I'm just going to show you how to make the neat edges. If you've got an overlocker or you're learning to use an overlocker, don't get too hung up on the colour of the threads. So I've got this ochre colour today, and I know I haven't got that colour thread, and it's expensive to stock lots and lots of different coloured cones. But what you can do is mix a range of threads. So this is a cone one with my reel holder underneath. Then I've got a sort of goldy coloured one, and I've got a lemony coloured one, and these are just moon threads that I had. When you mix them up and sew with them, you get a sort of, it's not a white edge because I wouldn't want to use all my white cones. It sort of blends in with the fabric. The one you want the most is the upper looper. That needs to be the one that's a colour, and even if the others were white, you wouldn't see it so much. So there's a little tip: if you're using an overlocker, mix your coloured threads to get a sort of homogenized stitch line. If you haven't got an overlocker, no problem, you can just use an overlocking foot on your normal sewing machine, or you can just zigzag the edges. You'll need to put your machine on a stretch stitch, so that's a very narrow zigzag, which is what I like to use. So I have only 0.5 wide and I have it 2.5 long, or you could use a lightning stitch, which is this one here, like that. That works as well on stretch fabrics, but a zigzag's as good as anything. You might need to put a stretch stitch in for going through sweatshirt fabrics, but have a little test on a spare piece before you start. And the first part of the pattern is to turn under the curved edge of your pocket and sew in place. It's a really good idea when you're making children's clothes to keep your ends trimmed, otherwise the threads get caught in the next piece that you're sewing because they're so small. So you've got a curved edge like this. You can press this sweatshirt fabric. You might need to turn your iron down a touch, and you can iron it from the right side. So you've done the curved edge, and now it's time to do the top and the bottom edge. That's a different seam allowance, so make sure you're following the seam allowances so that everything fits together. I had my markings done with the carbon paper, so I can put the pocket now onto the front and stitch with a 6mm seam allowance. Okay, once you've got the pocket on, you're then going to attach the front and the back together along the side seams, and you remember I marked some notches, so I'm going to be matching those up along here. So I'm going to match those up and make sure that the leg seam is even and the underarm seam is even, and I'm going to sew the left side, the right side, and the inside leg seam. Then I'm going to use the overlocker to stitch the edges together, the seam allowances together. Again, you can zigzag, there's no problem. When you're sewing this jersey, it's important not to pull here or you'll get a very, very wavy edge. So you need to be sort of doing the opposite really. You need to be pushing it towards the foot. You don't want it to ruck or pucker, but you definitely mustn't pull here or pull at the back because you'll get a ripply edge. If you're getting a bit of a ripply edge anyway, try making your stitch length a little bit longer. You can change the pressure on your foot. So because this is quite fleecy, you don't want to be pressing that down because it'll grip on the feed dogs, which are the little zigzags in the bottom. So you need to get it going through smoothly without you pulling it or pushing it, but where the feed dogs take it through evenly. Stage 5 is to work the facings. So you're going to interface the facings with the lightweight interfacing that's in the kit. It means that the actual romper stays stretchy, but it will be stabilized by this, so it won't all stretch out of shape. So you need the interfacing to hold the shape of the curves. And you're going to sew the sides with a 1.5 seam allowance because that's the same as you used for the side seams on the romper. And then we're going to put those along the inside of the romper suit top. Once your facing is in one piece, you're then going to match the notches and put it right sides together with your romper. So this is the romper here, and the facing is right sides together, and you're going to get this shape. Start at an armhole, go all the way around. Then you're going to need to clip the corners so you get a good fabric turn, and then you're going to press it all out. I actually just trimmed this seam, but when I flipped it the right way out, it just feels too lumpy for a place where I'm going to put a buttonhole. So I'm just going to trim the seam just on that curved top edge. I'm going to take some of that off because it is felty and a bit thicker, this sweatshirt fabric. And then when I turn it the right way, I'm getting the proper curve shape, and I can roll it out, get a nice curve shape without having too much bulk that's coming down too low, because then it will start to interfere with my buttonhole. Keep working the fabric. The facing takes a while to get it all nice and flat, and then it says in the pattern to hand stitch down on the end of the facing on the side seam. I'm actually going to do a stitch in the ditch down the side to hold it in place properly. I sometimes think it still means it flaps a little bit. So a stitch in the ditch is when you sew from the right side really inside that fold of the seam, just to the length of the facing and back again, and that will hold it in place. I'll come back in a moment and show you how far I've got with handling this facing fabric. Next, you're going to make sure that you've rolled all the seams out as much as they go, and then you're going to top stitch around here. Now you need to take your machine off the stretch stitch because you're not requiring the stretch at this point, because this is interface, so this has become a stable part of your garment because those will go over like this. So if you've got top stitching, just try on a scrap piece first. Get yourself a nice stitch length, a little bit longer than you would normally use for sewing. Just work out how you're going to run along the edge, use your foot to help you. So just make sure, because the top stitching on these straps is the key to the whole finish. So practice on a piece first, just to check that what you get is what you think you're going to get, because that will be what everybody sees on the shoulders. Right, got a few options for the closures. So if I'm following the pattern has a buttonhole, which we marked with the serrated tool at the beginning, and there are buttons to match, little lemony creamy ones. So I'm going to show you how to use those because that's how we're following the pattern. But if you're not sure about that, or you've got a particular fabric that's associated with the child who's wearing it, you can use some self-cover buttons. So you could cover one of those with a pattern cotton, or a colour from something that was an item of their clothing from the past. And if the thought of buttonholes just really puts you off, then you could try some cam snaps. That's K-A-M, cam snaps. And cam snaps are pretty quick, and they've got a pointy pin part and a piece that goes on top, and then you crunch them together using one of these tools. So you put the material in between, and then this bar here squashes that pin down inside. There are instructions with it, so you could use it, but if you're making a lot of baby clothes or toddler clothes, or that's the part of your life that you're on, an investment in cam snaps is good, because some baby grow patterns would have them round here. If you got a better sewer, you could probably work out how to add them round there if you wanted to. You could put two here vertically, or you could put two next to each other. So there's a few different options. Cam snaps with a cam snap tool, a buttonhole, and shank sew on buttons, or some self-covering buttons if you'd like to add a special patterned coloured touch. Okay, so if your machine has got an automatic buttonholing foot, it's got a little metal bar on, and that will fit under your foot gripper there. And then you put a button in the back, so my button is here, and that's showing the width of the buttonhole that I need. And then you should have a little lever that pulls down somewhere, and that needs to go into this distance here, because that is going to show the sewing machine stop, so stop, so stop. So it's going to show you the distances between. Making a buttonhole on sweatshirt fabric needs a little bit of practice. So this is my first one, and it was quite ripply, and lots of the zigzag stitches sort of sunk into the sweatshirt fabric. This is my second one, and I used a little bit of dressmaking paper under that one. And this is my third one, and this is the best one. I haven't pressed that one, but this is the best one. You can see it's holding its shape. And what I did was I put a piece of a waxy paper underneath, so this side was quite shiny, so the sort of feel you would get on baking paper or greaseproof paper. And then I just peeled it off, and I'll just get those little bits off afterwards, and then I'm ready to slit that open. But it's just held the fabric stable, and it's also helped the feed dogs have something to grip onto that's smoother than this, because this is stretchy, the feed dogs were gripping it and not moving it on. It was just gripping it and going like this and keeping it in the same place. Whereas when I had the paper on the back, it did keep just moving through the machine. So there's a few tips for making buttonholes. The biggest tip I can give you is to do one of these first and not spoil the very front of your romper straight off. Using those dressmaker's marks I had before, I've just gone over those with an air erasable pen just to give me a bit of a clearer line. And I've cut myself a new piece of tissue, and I want the shiny side against the feed dogs. Just going to pop that underneath, and then I'm ready to sew. Just a little tip for finishing off your buttonhole is to put a pin at each end, and then when you use your unpicker to slip that open, you won't scoot through and go past the buttonhole. The pin acts as a sort of stopper bar, and then you can check your button, fits through the hole, and that's ready to sew on. Time to move on to the finishing part, which is the leg cuffs. There are a few different leg ankle cuff finishes. There are elasticated ones, there are ankle ones, and so the ankle cuff is slightly smaller than the leg opening, so you will get a sort of slight gather around the top. And on view C there's a turn up cuff, and this is the one that I'm going to show you today. This one requires you to stretch the leg cuff to match the opening, and this one involves making a casing with elastic. So this one is the one I'm going to show you today. If you've not made children's clothes before, this is the sort of elephant in the room, which is trying to get a really small circumference onto another one. So you have your romper the right way out, and then you're going to put your cuff band inside the leg, so you've got all of the raw edges matching. So the cuff band is now inside, and I'm going to pin it all together, and I'm going to make sure that the pins are on the inside, and I'll show you why. So you match up the side seams first, and there are also leg notches. There's one, so I can match that up with that side seam, and I want all the pins to be on the inside, and I also want the protected heads of the pins to be here, so that as I'm putting them through the machine I'm not scratching myself on them. They're here, look. And if you're sewing really small circumferences, the best way to do it is from the inside, and I'll show you a different view of that now. So you've got the foot inside the cuff, so the cuff can rotate without you catching underneath it. And you can catch the pins because they're pointing out the right way, and you're keeping all of the raw edges together. The cuff's got the seam here, so this is the wrong side, the fleecy side, and this is the right side, which looks alarming because you think, oh, I've got all the raw edge on the outside. But you're now going to flip that up so that you've got a cuff on the bottom of the leg, and the same as you did for the facing, going to do a little stitch in the ditch in each side, and that will stop the cuff coming down. and then you can press all that down so that your cuff seam lies flat on the bottom, but you can't see anything there, look, because the raw edges are all in there, but you will have finished those with the zigzag or the overlocker. And that's it. That is the baby romper. Let's have a better look at it on a photograph. If you have any questions about today's make, you can put those below and we can try and help you along in your sewing journey. All the products that I've used today are listed here and you can select them, have a look at the sweatshirt fabric. Lots of people have used that fabric, so you'll see all the different makes from that sweatshirt fabric, adults, children's, and there's a huge range of how people have used it. You could also post directly under the Simplicity pattern, and you will also see other people who've made the pattern. Thank you very much for watching. If you've made a romper suit from a Simplicity pattern or any children's pattern, we'd love to see it. So you can share that with us and you can use the hashtag childrenswear.